Welcome to Reading by Candlelight at Molly's Cottage, where we proudly celebrate and promote new Australian authors and their stories. I'm Fiona Taylor, host of Reading by Candlelight, a community of readers brought together by Molly, founder and owner of Molly's Cottage, a sustainable gifting business. Molly's Cottage offer a monthly book box promoting a debut or emerging Australian writer, and their book is accompanied by selected local products complementing the novel's setting or protagonist. We hope that you enjoyed this month's chat with our Reading by Candlelight book box author. Welcome, Megan Rogers, to Reading by Candlelight at Molly's Cottage.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to talk to you today about your truly beautiful book, The Heart is a Star. And how gorgeous is that cover? You must be so happy with that.
I know, I'm so happy. I actually opened up the file when I was in a very busy children's play centre for my little girl's birthday. And as soon as I saw it, I broke into tears. And for any of you who've been in busy children's play centres before, you'll know how crazy they can be. And I think all of the parents around me thought I was a little bit loopy, actually. But I was so overjoyed to see the beautiful creation that Hazel had done for me. And I'm beside myself with it, to be honest.
I think that it really does tell the story on the cover. And which is it doesn't always happen, but when it does happen, it's magical. So congratulations on that.
Yeah.
First, I'd like to acknowledge I'm on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, here at Molly's Cottage, Reading at Candlelight at Molly's Cottage, we're all about celebrating new voices, and so I add my appreciation of Aboriginal stories handed down for generations. Now, a little bit about Megan before we start, because I was intimidated reading your bio.
Oh my God, don't be. Please don't be.
So many degrees.
Oh, they're just bits of paper.
But they include a Bachelor of Arts Science, a Diploma of Professional Writing and Editing. I did that one too. A graduate diploma in professional communication, and a Master of Marketing and a PhD in creative writing. You've been published in literary journals, academic publications, as well as having a non-fiction book, Finding the Plot, a maternal approach to madness in literature. I feel that there is some kind of madness in both. And you have also taught at RMIT, marketing manager for State Library. So impressive.
Oh, that's very kind.
And then wrote a beautiful book to top it all off.
Yeah, I've been busy. But they are just, I think I spent a lot of my time, and I think that a lot of writers might appreciate this, that I probably was partly delaying actually writing a book by doing a lot of courses.
Oh yes, that's why I did PWE.
Yeah, I think that I just always felt that I wasn't, and don't get me wrong, I've learned so much in those courses over the years, but I also think there was an element where I just didn't think I was good enough without getting as many pieces of paper as I could.
No, and I understand that. And I think that too, that sometimes we don't trust ourselves enough.
Yeah.
And so we think somebody else is going to tell us what we need to hear to continue. And sometimes, so I understand that, yes, very much. Now, I have to say, I loved The Heart as a Star. Keep putting it up because it's such a beautiful cover. And what I loved about it, Megan, it's such an honest story. Your protagonist, Layla, she's not perfect.
No.
She's honest about her desires and also about what she perceives is the truth of her past. And the interwoven flashbacks gave us great insight into her childhood, but it also allowed the story to travel in the present day without the need for two separate timelines. I was really impressed by that, because I think that the easy way out would have been to have written it as two separate stories. But it meant that I always felt immersed in Layla's
good.
world and in her story. And it made me want to turn every page to get to the end to find out what happened, but not just to her, but to everyone involved in her journey of self-discovery. Because for many people in the story, especially towards the end, and we don't do spoilers here, but it was like a culmination for not just her, but for many people in the end. And so I think that, you know, it really made me want to go, oh, otherwise, if you'd been switching between two stories, I don't think that you would have got that
I'm
need
so glad that you noticed that.
yeah, no, I really loved it. Congratulations.
You're actually the first person I'm speaking to about the book.
Oh, really?
All the other interviews that I've done are about the process and so forth. But you are, so I'm actually getting a bit emotional because just
I'm going to get emotional.
Yeah, just to hear someone talking about the book, you know, because you but you know, you spend so much time, and I think, you know, as a working mum, you know, making those decisions about plot and backstory and knowing how much work it's going to take, it sometimes can be really easy to take not a simpler road, but a road that will mean less hours needed on the page. And so to have someone see that, it genuinely means a lot to me. So.
Oh, I'm so glad. Oh my goodness. I didn't realize this was your first about the book. Oh, this is so exciting now.
Yeah.
So, already By Candlelight, we don't do spoilers. So without spoilers, can you give an elevator pitch for The Heart Is a Star?
The $1 million question, isn't it?
No, it's not hard, isn't it? And it's a mean question, but I have to.
No, it's necessary. And I felt always a bit nervous about this part because, you know, I'd spent so many time teaching students at RMIT to develop this pitch. And I thought, gee, if I get this wrong, I'm going to get some emails from students kind of bagging me out a bit, but that's fine. So the elevator pitch is The Heart Is a Star is the story of a woman who races to the west coast of Tasmania to try to stop her mother from killing herself, but in doing so saves her own life.
Exactly it. Wonderful. That was brilliant. Oh my goodness.
That's the pitch.
And it's not an easy thing to do, to take all of that
into one sentence. Yeah.
So hard. But you've done an extremely good job there. Now, what made you decide to write this story? Because I'm sure that there could have been many things that you could have written about. What was it about this that drew you to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's probably two answers to that. And first of all, I think it took me a really long time to actually just write a novel. I'd wanted to since I was 4. I'm one of those real cliched stories about I've wanted this for so long, and had probably procrastinated quite a bit. And of course I was busy, you know, studying, new mum, all those types of things, but sometimes they can be excuses as well. And my dad, you know, got sick, very sick, and we lost him recently. And he developed Alzheimer's, and I just thought, you know, I love that quote by Elizabeth Gilbert that says something along the lines, I'm going to get it wrong here, that, you know, she's never seen a person kind of move forward or succeed or grow unless they get tired of their own bullshit. I hope I'm allowed to swear a little bit, sorry.
It's fine.
And I think that my dad getting really sick forced me to, you know, get tired of my own excuses a bit.
Yeah.
And so that's when I decided, okay, enough, just sit down and write this goddamn thing, because if you actually do want this, if this is your dream, then start to actually write a book then, you know, stop talking about it. So that is part of the answer. And then the second part of that is soon thereafter, my little girl, who was 7 weeks old at the time, my second child, got really sick. And I raced her to the Royal Children's in Melbourne. My husband was, as always is the way when these things happen, interstate for work. And she had stopped breathing and she got really bad bronchiolitis. And they saved her, and they were incredible. And I was sitting in the cafeteria afterwards when they discharged us, and I was pretty far from ready to go home. I just didn't feel competent enough or ready enough or all those things. And I had my toddler and my baby, and I must have looked like a complete mess, right? Just hadn't slept in a week. Goodness knows, probably milk vomit on my shoulder. My boobs were probably leaking. Who knows, right? I was probably not great. But a woman approached me, and she was wearing lanyards and all the official attire. And she said, you know, do you want me to sit with you and your baby and your child for a while, and you can go to the toilet and grab some food? And I'm terrible at accepting help, but I think I was too exhausted to say no. So I accepted, and I went to the toilet, and I think I had the greatest ham and cheese sandwich I've ever had in my life. And I sat back down with her, and as strangers often do, you know, we got talking, and she said that she was an anaesthetist at the hospital. She had growing children herself. You know, she never came to work feeling like she was doing a good job of either of it, professionally or personally, and so forth. She had an aging mother she was looking after, and she was really candid and really honest. And she said, you know, the greatest gift this work has given me is to not look away. So when I see someone distressed or in pain or not coping, as I probably did look like I was doing a very good job of, you know, I don't look away. And so I went home that night and I wrote the opening line to the novel, which actually never changed.
Oh.
And it took me a few years to actually write, you know, in a chunk it, but it was that moment that I wanted to encapsulate, which is watching a woman's journey. And it was inspired by this particular doctor. It's not her story. It's a completely fictionalized story, but that's where it started. And I wanted to follow a woman's journey without looking away. You know, I grew up with such romanticized female characters, such, you know, good girls, such, you know, they were always the partly a victim, you know, they were growing into themselves, never really the ones to make the bad mistakes anyway. And I wanted to write something which was much more honest and honored this doctor.
That's a wonderful background to the story, Megan, and that it does explain why you made her an anaesthetist. Is that like in honor of the person who came?
Yeah.
That's so special. Just a little aside, our son was also saved at the Royal Children's Hospital.
Oh, you're kidding me.
No. When he was 10, he had Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a autoimmune disorder that attacks the central nervous system. And by the time we got him there, he only had about 20 hours to live, and they and they saved. And I know exactly where you're coming from with that. It's just what people there give you is they give you more than hope. They give you the strength to stand up and keep walking for your child. And
that's such a good way to put it.
So important that a person came into your life, I feel, at this time, because for a reason. And I'm a bit woo-woo about it.
I know, I'm a bit woo-woo, don't worry. I'm very woo-woo.
Into your life for a reason. So I just kind of feel that that's just amazing.
Yeah. I'm very woo-woo, so don't worry.
Now, you mentioned that about your first line, never ever changing. So I'm just going to read that out for those that have not read it yet, because a lot of people haven't got this because they've only got an art. Or if you've got your copy, you could read that first.
Oh, I don't have it, but I can say it. I can say it.
Excellent. Off you go.
So it is. Like a splinter in my finger, I always thought that if I left my mother alone, she would work herself out.
I love that. Like, that is such a good line. And it is, and it's, you can feel it, hear it, see it. And I think that a lot of people have very grow up with fraught relationships with their mums. And so I think that on many levels, people would understand that or go, oh, I don't really know what she's talking about, but it doesn't matter which it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess it's my job to, create the empathy so that they can step into her.
Yes.
I think that's kind of my job as a writer, is that if somebody hasn't experienced it, then it's kind of my job. It's my job to kind of get them to feel it, like, to get a sense of what it would feel like.
Yes. And you do that so well, Megan, is that because you don't you give Layla's emotions and you give her reasoning behind it. And everything that she says, everything that she feels makes you wonder what kind of mother she grew up with.
Yeah.
And so it's not like you've spelt it out. It's not like, you've shown them what the mother was doing at the time or anything like that. It's just all based on Layla's emotion. And because we are in her world and we live with her and we follow her, we really feel empathy for how she has been treated as a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's masterfully done.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. I think one of my biggest fears, and this is, as a writer, you have to let all these fears go because otherwise you censor yourself. And I'm quite close with my mum. And so one of my biggest fears was, oh my God, and with things like, I mean, people know that Layla's having an affair, so that's not a spoiler, but I mean, I'm a married woman, one of my biggest fears was, oh my God, what if the teachers at school think, I won't describe it, but all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I think that whilst there's some things that I've chosen not to share, I will, I guess, say that I did grow up with having a very complicated relationship with my father, and he suffered for many years with mental illness. And I think, like actors do, you bring into situations your experience with either a different parent or a different person or things like that. And so I probably channeled, some of the emotions that I felt growing up into a different situation.
Yes, just because it's on the page doesn't mean it ever happened to the writer.
No, but you worry, like I've got kids and anyway, you worry about these things. It's silly probably, but
I heard once Ali Lowe talking about the trivia night and how she hoped that the teachers at her children's school didn't think that she was in a swingers club.
Well, this is it. And you do think that because, I mean, my husband and I joke about nobody, imagine if I wrote a book about my day-to-day life, woman gets up, makes some lunch boxes, drop the kids off at school, comes back, works, I mean, nobody wants to read that book. I mean, I love my life, but nobody wants to read that book.
Nobody wants to read what's already happening to them in their own lives.
Well, that too, right? Yeah, that too. That's not a page turner. Yeah.
You wrote the first line when your child was 7 weeks old. How long did it take you to write altogether?
So I was still finishing my PhD, and the book that I was writing, so the academic book, came out, soon thereafter. So I had the impetus in the first line and the idea. I didn't come back to it till years and years later, just because I was just so, in young child world, and I just didn't have the capacity or headspace to write a book at that time. And so I had it there, and that was where the story came from. But I didn't really seriously sit down and write it until just before COVID. And I wrote a lot of it during COVID. I'm in Melbourne too. So even though we are kind of on the, we're a bit over an hour outside, we're still considered metropolitan. So we were in heavy lockdown. And so it took me, I would say, 3 years, but 2 years of really serious writing. So 2 to 3 years. And, I wrote a lot of it sitting on the floor in my pantry because I was remote learning with 2 children. My husband had the office. And it was one of the hardest things. I mean, I know that relatively speaking, there's people starving in the world. I'm always really careful about that because God, Megan, you privileged person, don't say that. But and I'm not a stranger to hard things in my life, but this was relatively speaking a difficult task under the circumstances.
It is hard to be writing a book sitting in your pantry while your children.
It is where the food is though, so I did have bread and cheese and alcohol.
And to write it in 3 years, that you don't realize how quick that is.
It's a hard question though, because I always feel a bit dishonest saying that, because 2 to 3 years hard slog, but I mean, I've wanted this my whole life and have been thinking about the plot and lines, and so it's not, I mean, I think especially with the first novel, right, because you've got kind of who knows what lead up, it's almost hard to pin down that time. For the second novel, it'll be so much more obvious and cut and dry. I started it here, I finished it here, but for the first one it's different. But so it is relatively quick. People can take like 10 years, but I also don't want to be dishonest, especially for anyone out there who's spent 10 years, because in all honesty, it did, I'd be breastfeeding, eating snacks and I would be thinking about it.
Yeah.
So that's in the years leading up. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit more grey.
Yeah, it's kind of like that first one is kind of more organic because you're taking time, you're learning, whatever. I mean,
yeah.
How do you count that? You don't.
Yeah, it's
impossible. But you know when you started to actually put it all.
Right, that's right. Yeah. So 2 to 3 years,
hard slog.
Yeah.
I don't want to embarrass you any further, but I wanted to tell you how incredibly beautiful I found your work because the descriptions of landscape often read like poetry.
Oh,
and we visit Tasmania often because that's
I always get worried. I get worried about, like, especially people who live there. I'm like, oh my God, what am I?
Because that's where our daughter lives. And it's such a stunning, wild, natural place. What made you set much of your story in Tasmania?
It's a really good question. And so I love Tasmania, and I hadn't been there as much as you would have, and what a lot of people would have. But I've always loved it and been there enough, to know it. But I was really, really drawn to it for some reason. And so when we were in between lockdowns, I really wanted to get it right. And so I did the drive that Layla does. And I did it. I was actually really stressed when I was doing it because it was the first night that I'd been away from my girls by myself. I'd been away from my husband, just by myself. And we were also in that situation where people were getting stuck in places if there were lockdowns and so forth. So I was terrified, spent half the time in tears, worried that I'd get stuck in Tasmania away from my children, which is just, for me, it's just, I can't even. And
I can't even.
I get anxiety even thinking about it now. And so I felt kind of like Layla did driving in that car, and I drove from Hobart to the West Coast, looking at the landscape and so forth, and stayed, around the location in the novel is fictional, is made up, but it is based upon Stanley and Strawn, an amalgamation of the two kind of. And I came back, and because my father was alive but very unwell at the time, I was doing my family tree because I was trying to capture as much as I could from him. And my dear friend, who I've known since I was 18, and I'm 44 this year, so that's a long time, Simon is a genealogist.
Oh.
And he was doing my family history. And I had always thought, because my dad didn't speak about his family very much, for very good reason, and I had always thought that my grandfather was born in Camberwell, and that they were kind of, really lower working class. They owned a fruit shop, at the junction there and all that kind of stuff. So I thought he was born there. So it turns out, and Simon, my genealogist, said that this is the most coincidental thing he has had in the 30 years he's worked in it. My grandfather was born 5 minutes from where I set the novel in Tasmania. And the church that I took a photo of on my trip is the church that my great-grandparents got married in.
Oh my goodness. See, happens for a reason.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't just in Tasmania, but it was literally the spot that I was. And it's interesting when you're writing, some things don't feel like a choice. It was never a choice for me. That was just where I was writing. It was never a decision even for me. I didn't sit there and kind of mull over it at all. That was always where she was going. And so I felt like the universe almost made the choice for me.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And just to think that, that connection, and that gave me chills.
Yeah, I know. I still get goosebumps even thinking about it.
Writing this, your fictional debut, I mean, you're an academic writer before, nonfiction author. Was this process of writing very different for you?
Yes. Oh gosh, so different. And I'm not, and I don't think that I'm naturally a non-fiction or academic writer. That's not what I'm drawn to. I've always written fiction and poetry and so forth. That's what I've done since I was a little girl. So really it was just, I did my PhD in creative writing to develop my skills in creative writing. But as happens, you also have to write an exegesis, a thesis. And it did relatively well, and so somebody wanted to publish it, and who says no to that? I was going to say no to that. So it was, in many ways, I felt it was a step towards possibly getting what I wanted to get published one day. That I was flexing my muscles, that I was practicing writing in long form, which is difficult in and of itself. And it was intellectually both stimulating and tiring. But if I were to compare it to writing a novel, for me personally, the experiences were night and day. And, in my head, I think about it as the difference between going for a jog around the block and running a marathon. For me, the novel tested every capacity that I had. It tested my capacity for craft. It tested my capacity to problem solve. It tested my emotional capacity to feel what Layla was feeling. And I know that other authors talk about this too, kind of dipping into that experience that she's having that relates to a trauma that I may have had that is not the same, completely different. But those emotions are still there. And so you're stepping into that again and feeling that again. And that is a confronting thing. And it's certainly something that doesn't happen when you're talking about narratology in a textbook. Too, the only other thing I'd say was to balance that out. It was also the most enjoyable and joyful experience of my life because, this is what I love. I'm a person who loves to write. I love to edit. I lose time. I can spend days and days and days writing a scene, and I love nutting it out. And so I also didn't experience the magic of writing a novel in the academic text. There's magical moments where you're having a shower and, because I write the way I like to read, which is I both plot and it comes out, but I'll be in the shower and I'll be like, oh my God, that happens. And those are that's the magic, right? Another thing that doesn't happen in a textbook, so, it's not just more exhausting, it is also more enjoyable.
That's wonderful to hear. Now, you obviously have a love and interest of science and astrology. I learned so much about stars and the human body from your
such a nerd. I'm such a nerd. Yeah.
Oh no, but I read things that I had never even known. It was wonderful.
That's good. Something that actually I didn't think about that.
Oh really?
Yes. I just kind of write. I don't really think. I often don't think about that, like how the reader will be coming to it. So
you need to research much about the stars and the human body and things like that, or did you just draw it from your own knowledge?
Oh, that's a really good question. Bit of both. So I have always loved maths and science, and I had to really hold back a bit too because I didn't want it to weigh the story down, because I wanted it to carry forth. And so I wanted it to sweeten the text, not weigh it down. So I really held back. I could have gone on for paragraph, go down the rabbit hole a bit. So some of it I knew, but there was not an instant in that book where I didn't check it, even if I felt like I knew it, because you can feel as though you know something, and as we all know, it can be at least slightly incorrect. So because it is going to be in a book, I checked everything that I wrote twice, thrice. So a lot of it came from the knowledge that I developed in my science degree. I have a background in quantum physics and astrophysics and astronomy. And so some of it came from that place, but I always checked, and I always, there were always elements to it that I may not have fully known or understood and so forth. So I had the enjoyable task of researching it myself, just making sure that I got the nuances about it right. So I didn't necessarily have to research it, but I did need to fact check it many a time. So the medical stuff I had to research a bit more because I love science and I love that kind of thing. I was hopefully able to roll with it and apply it to the scene, but it's certainly an area that I needed more help.
And how does it start? It centers around the midlife predicament of many women who fight to keep that balance between work, family, marriage. And what made that an important theme for you to explore?
Oh, I think just nearly every single woman in my life was dealing with it on some level. Just the juggle, you know, it didn't matter whether they were a working mum or a stay-at-home mum or somewhere in the middle, or if they didn't have children as well. You know, it didn't matter that there came a point in nearly every woman I know's life where they'd spent the first half of their life building, accumulating, growing, studying, you know, building a career and so forth. And I remember thinking at some stage, you know, what happens if you spend your whole life climbing a ladder and you realize it was up against the wrong wall?
Yes.
If you look over and you just go, fuck, what have I done? Like, this isn't where I wanted to be. And it felt like that was happening for a lot of women. And climbing back down that ladder is a really difficult thing, you know, whether it means divorce or relationship breakdown or, you know, realizing that you can't have children and that's not the journey, or the fact that you realize that you didn't have the relationship with your family that you did and so forth. So it's that breakdown of a previous identity and the really uncertain development of a new one in the second half. And I think the only other thing I would add is, especially when I was drafting it during COVID, I was watching nearly every single woman in my life, not in every household, but most, the women be responsible for the remote learning, whilst often working, whilst juggling cooking dinners and, you know, managing a household and so forth. And that to me took me by surprise. And it felt, especially, you know, in those really intense lockdowns, it felt as though we had gone back about 50 years in, you know, gender equality. And it felt as though that pressurized situation also made women question their priorities and question their roles and so forth. And so it almost felt like it kind of increased by 10-fold the changes that were going on in their life. It just made them happen a lot quicker and come to a lot of quicker, you know, decisions about things as well.
Well, I think it's a very important theme, and it's an expectation
Right.
that women will step up and look after the parent.
Right. Absolutely.
Or, you know, or to be the one that goes and helps others out, or who puts everyone else before herself.
That's exactly right.
So I think that it's an extremely important theme, and you don't have to have Layla's situation.
No, that's right. And I don't. Yeah.
No, I think it's I think that a lot of readers will be able to see parts of themselves or their friends in Layla, and the expectations that are on her, and also trying to work at the top level and keep everything going. I mean, this is not something that happens to a man. I mean, not always. Like, rarely. Because, you know, kudos to my husband, who's always like worked from home, and so we've always shared. But I'm blessed, you know, and I know that. It doesn't happen to everyone. But you know, that's kind of like, I kind of feel like it's not the norm. And you address that in the book with, I think, beautifully, with one of the doctors who, you know, is dressing Layla down, and she's kind of like, well, you know, you've always had Margaret at home doing this for you.
Yeah, it's easy for you to say. Yeah.
I've heard from various sources, sources, that your novel is being compared to the work of best-selling authors Holly Ringland, Hannah Rochelle. How does that make you feel? Sorry to embarrass.
Oh no,
I can see how red you're going.
I know. I'm probably a bit perimenopausal at the moment, so I'm getting flushes as it is. But I always feel deeply uncomfortable, and this is probably the same with a lot of women. I feel deeply uncomfortable getting compliments. Never been able to take them. I often will say, oh, you know, I did a thing, it wasn't much, don't worry about it, it's no big deal. And so when I hear that, I'm like, whatever, you know, and I have such deep respect for those women. And somebody mentioned Flanagan in a books and publishing review, and I just went, whatever, just me in this little, you know, area of mine sitting down with paper. So for me, it is all a little bit surreal to take on board within my body, because it's just me, right? It's just Megan. Like, I grew up in Frankston, in the suburbs. We didn't have much growing up. You know, I was writing in between, putting kids to bed. So when people compare me to writers that I have such a deep love and respect for, and I love writers, I just see them as the most incredible beings. It makes me deeply humbled and surprised.
That's what I find, that the people who are the most talented are always the most humble. So it's lovely to hear how humbled you are. I mean, it feels surreal to have people compare you to your own idols.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
It just must be amazing.
And I'm just really mindful of not sitting here and making people think that I'm any different from any other person who is working on their manuscript. I never want anyone to feel as though I have some special magical formula or ability that anybody else doesn't have. And that said, I also have to be a little bit careful because I have 2 daughters, and I've been very mindful of the fact that I don't want them to grow up not being able to accept a compliment. And so sometimes when they're around, it really irks me, but I try to say thank you when my daughter's with me, because I'm thinking I don't want them to see me bash myself up like I do in my head always. I don't want them to embody that as well growing up. So it's a really fine line, and I haven't got it figured out yet.
It will come more naturally as time goes on with the next book.
Yeah, cross fingers.
Now, we can't have a favorite child, and I know which of your characters is my favorite, but which character did you enjoy writing the most?
Oh, see, I mean, I have 2. I always have 2 answers. I'm a Libran. So I'm going to say that the character that I enjoyed writing the most was Dawn, in terms of enjoyment, just because I could have a bit of fun for her, and her job in the book was and is really to balance out some of the heaviness. You know, so I had a lot of fun with her, but I also deeply loved her, and I wanted to not make her the butt of a joke as well, which was really important for me. I wanted her to stand up as a well, hopefully rounded character with her own foibles and weaknesses and strengths and history. So I didn't want to make her just a funny character either. It's not my style anyway. So she was my favorite to write, just because she gave me a break, I think, from some of the heaviness. But I would have to say Layla, purely because from a writing and craft perspective, she gave me the most challenges, just because she's the protagonist too. But, you know, I really had to work at that fine line between making her very human and making mistakes. But I also wanted to give the reader enough of the background, enough of the story to create a deep amount of empathy for her and why she sometimes messed up and so forth, like we all do, you know, maybe in different ways. But so I'm dying to know, because I haven't spoken to, you know, besides, you know, my publisher and my agent and stuff who've read it. You don't talk to them like this, right? Though. So who's your favorite character?
So I did love Layla. I loved the fact that she had this persona of calmness, and then inside she's just absolutely
Yeah.
freaking out.
Hot mess.
I love that. But Dawn is definitely my
Yeah.
and the reason why is because I have a lot of elderly great aunts, and she
Yeah.
reminds me very much of them. It's very much that, um, say what you think,
Yeah.
pull people up, very honest, but also very caring as
Yeah.
well, and very giving, and
Yeah.
just really blunt. And they've got to that stage in their lives because they're all in their mid to late 80s, where they just wear what they want, do what they want,
I know. I hope
turn
I'm
up when they
like
want.
I hope I'm like Dawn.
Talked about a really important point, is that that it comes a time in a person's life where they feel that they are invisible due to their age.
Yes.
And I thought that was just so beautifully done. And I felt really excited for Dawn getting out there and being able to live a bit of life towards the end.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
I
right.
thought
Yeah,
that was
I wanted
important.
I just wanted to give her that too. And I think, like writing a messy middle-aged woman in Layla, I also wanted to write an older woman. Like when I was growing up, most of the books that I read didn't have older women with desires. God forbid an 85-year-old woman wants to have sex and,
Exactly.
eat beautiful food. Like, why can't she have that? So, Dawn allowed me, I think, to do that a bit too. But I had to laugh because a friend of mine, Paul Delgado, who has a beautiful book out too, he read it and he said that he's getting T-shirts made up that says Team Dawn. And I thought that's super cute.
See, she's a beautiful character.
Thank you. That means a lot because they become real people. They became real for me. So
Yeah, and I think that, and it shows in the book, because they're so well rounded and they're such complete people. You don't feel like anyone's just put there to be the token this or the token.
yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, no, very well done. And this is a question that I didn't give you a heads up for, because I was rereading some of it last night, and I thought I would just mention, in case people have never heard of it, because I'd only recently heard of it, about the Dark Sky movement in Tasmania. And I really, really happy that you put that in the book, because it's such an important. Recently my husband and I went to the Cook Islands, and I just could not believe the amount of stars I could see, because there's no light pollution.
So beautiful, isn't
it? It was mind-blowing. And when they're talking about that movement in Tasmania, where they want to make the darkness a national park, I believe, is what they're trying to do. And so that nobody can ever put lights there.
It's for the animals too, and the plants.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so important. And when I read that, I went, I know about that.
Oh, glad, I'm so good. Yeah, but it's always been such a big thing for me, is that we don't often think about light pollution as pollution, but in fact, and of course us humans have messed things up in so many different ways, but the amount of lights that we have on at nighttime is deeply affecting our environment around us. And it also, I think, separates us from experiencing the environment at its most magical, whether that be the sounds of the animals and the sight of the stars at night. And actually the woman who's in that scene, Liz, she's actually a parent at school, because for Mother's Day last year, I was writing that scene, or just filling it out really, and I just needed the character, and so I ruffled the name off. And so the woman who talks about the dark skies and so forth, that's a mum at my little girl.
Oh, that's really sweet. And how exciting for her to be in a book.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that that's a bit odd because I'm just me, but she seemed to be really excited. And it raised money, right? It raised money for the school. It went to the playground. So
that's great. There's so many different parts of this book, that like things that you've put in that you don't overdo it.
Oh, good.
Your restraint is incredible. And I think that, it's nothing is done with a heavy hand at all. It's such a light touch. And you read it, you absorb it, you enjoy it, and then you move on with the story. It's not like you're being hit over. Like sometimes, you read things and they're like, I don't need 2 pages of description about a babbling brook. I really don't.
Yeah.
I just need to know it was pretty and it was there.
That's right. Like when Dickens spends like 5 pages describing grass or something, you just think, thanks.
Yeah. Most of your readers wouldn't have time to read that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I'm a mum who has to work to pay the bills, and I don't either. So, why would I write and put someone through that? That's not fair. Mind you, in conversation, I probably can go on a little bit. So maybe I do it.
I think we all can. And I especially think that it's very different for writers, because we spend so much time by ourselves that when we get into the real world,
so true.
People, we never shut up.
No, and sometimes I misread. I don't come across it, but I'm really introverted. And so when I'm in conversation, sometimes I don't read cues as well as I probably should.
I understand that same. And so sometimes people will say, I really have to go now. And you go,
yes. You see them backing away. I'm like, oh, sorry. And then I'll lie in bed all night. Oh
my God, I feel like we're separated at birth.
Worried. I'm like, was I too much? Did they, like, oh my God, and then, I'm such, like, I'm 5 years old, and then I'll message them like, hi, thanks for the conversation. Hope I wasn't too, like, I mean, to talk about social anxiety, and then they won't text me back, and I will spend a week like convincing myself that they haven't texted me back because I was an idiot and just completely ruined any relationship that I could possibly have with that person.
And then the next time you see them and they're just fine.
Oh, this is it. None of that stuff has ever come true. And yet
it's our writers' imaginations. I can't
stop myself. I'm terrible. Incurable.
For all our writers listening, I think I already know the answer to this. So you're a plotter or a pantser?
Oh, and I love these questions. I love craft questions. So I am what you probably call I reckon I'm about a 70% plotter and a 30% pantster. So I think too, because I'm a bit time poor, right? Like I write a lot in the car, like at school pickup. I'll be like, right, I'll go half an hour early and I'll just sit there with my computer and I'll write. So I don't have the leisure of getting up and writing for the day, and that's just not my reality. And that's okay, and all power to people who do have that reality, because I think good on you, but I also too love my life and I love my kids and everything. So I'm getting off track. Answer your question. So I have to have a certain amount of plot, because I have to know that I am going to be spending my time wisely. I can't just kind of write, I'm going to write about, the trees, or this I'm going to write about this character for 6 months and see what happens. So I will plot out a story. And because I also too, I love plot. I love storytelling. I like to hit certain notes and so forth, and I'll write it out. And I will write, give or take, in that order. I'll move things around later on and so forth, but in that order. And then what will happen is, 30% of the time or so, something like that, the story will surprise me and take me not in a completely different way, but the twist will be different, or what happens to a certain character and how they respond, because I love putting characters in situations and just seeing what happens. So that I find really joyful. So I find that I have to plot to a certain extent, but then I also love the joy of the story uncovering itself for me as well.
That's a wonderful answer. People are going to love that, because I think that sometimes you kind of feel like you get this feeling that you have to be one or the other, and
I would never ever consider myself one or the other, because I need both.
Now, what advice would you give anyone that's writing to be published?
Good question. Condolences. No, I'm just joking. I wouldn't do anything else in the world. I think, and I did see your questions that got sent through, but I didn't put too much thought into them because I always like to answer them a bit more honestly than crafting them. And plus my little girl was sick last night, so I love it. So I would say two things. I'd say trust yourself and trust the process.
Yeah.
Because, I think that if you're writing to get published, like I was, I think a lot of us write for enjoyment as well, of course, but I don't think there's any shame in saying that is what you want. There is no shame in that at all. And I'm a big believer in having as many writers and as many diverse voices out there as possible. So it took me a really long time to, first of all, trust myself. It took me a long time to go, okay, I know what works for me. I know the process that works for me. I just need to do it. I know if I know I need to sit in the car an hour before school pickup and do that. And if I just do that, if I just trust that every day, even if sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm making headway, I just need to trust it, and trust myself to do it. So, and I'm not one of those writers who gets 5,000 words down on a page every day. I'm not. It's just not possible. Like kids can get gastro for a week, or my husband can go away and I'm mowing lawns and taking dogs for. It's not as simple as that. So my advice would be to trust yourself as much as you can to find the time, and to trust the process that works for you. And that's all well and good when you're trying to get the novel written. But my advice then, once you've got it, because you're talking about people who want to get published, is, for me personally, I couldn't have not signed with an agent, just for me, because he was almost my psychologist. I'm with Benathan at Zeitgeist, and I really needed someone to be my first reader and to help me navigate the publishing process. And I mean, I used to work at Allen and Unwin, so I should have had some understanding of the process. And I tell you what, 90% of it I learned on the fly, because it's different for every book, different for every person. There's lots of amazing agents out there. And for me personally, like I also would have just signed with, if somebody said, I'll give you $1 for that book, I would have been like, oh my God, yes. I signed a contract for $1. I would have been like over the moon, right? And so I needed someone to give me a bit of perspective and to believe in me, to have someone go, no, that's not what we're doing here. And just to have faith that person would take the work out into the world, So that for me was, not everyone is like that. Some people self-publish and it's incredible. I don't think there's a right way at all. But for me personally, and that's, I guess, one of the things that is related to trust the process is, for me, I knew that needed to be my personal process. So I think get to know yourself and your process, get to know yourself and what you need. And if you can be honest with what you need, just take the next steps to get there. So that was my next step, was to get an agent. And that could be the right thing for other people too.
That's excellent advice. And because we go out to not just writers and readers as well, can you guess the readers? The readers are very important.
Well, and I'm both too, right? Like I'm
so
a reader.
I love reading.
Yeah, me too.
Can you recommend a book by an Australian author that you've read recently and would recommend? And yes, you can have more than one, because everyone always says to me, but I have two.
Yes, I do have two. And this book isn't necessarily, it's a recent publication in terms of relative to the, to our lifespan. But I read it recently. That is Charlotte McConaghy's Migrations.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. I didn't read it till after I'd kind of sent my book off, because with anyone's life, it gets really busy, and I just didn't have the time to read much. So I read that book recently and I just loved it. And I found it really engrossing, and I found the twists really good. It was a really nice balance between beautifully crafted sentences and incredible plot. And the other book that is one of my all-time favorite Australian books that I reread again recently is I for Isabel by Amy Whiting. And I love the book because the language is so simple but says so much. The words work so hard on the page. It's incredible. And Amy Whiting, which was her pen name, actually, she didn't get it published, and she actually won Age Book of the Year much, much later in her life. I think she was in her 80s, 70s or 80s. And I like that story too, because I am a really big believer that it's never too late. So those are the two that I would say. So I for Isabel by Amy Whiting and Migrations by Charlotte McConaghy.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And wonderful to have a book that's from somebody who wasn't recognized until that very later in life. I love that.
The story's great. If anyone wants to Google her, Amy Whiting, yeah, I just love her. I really love her story. It's a great story. Yeah.
Now, are you working on a next book?
I am heavily ensconced, you would say.
And can you tell us anything about it?
Yeah, I haven't checked this with my publisher, but fine. It's fine. It's all fine. So, yeah, hopefully she doesn't listen to this and I don't say anything out of turn, which I'm sure that I won't. But I am at my best when I'm working on a novel. I've learned that I have a very active mind, as we've spoken about. And if I don't direct that at a novel, then I usually direct it at myself. So it's almost a form of self-love and self-care to write for me. So yes, so I'm working on the next novel. I have plotted it out, as we spoke about. And now I am writing the first couple of chapters to see, because I one of the most important things for me is tone of voice and the voice of the character. And so what will I tell you? I will tell you that her name is Simone. I'm getting to know her at the moment. And I will also say that it is a book about pain. That is the topic that I'm delving into and exploring. Pain in all its forms and the ways that our emotional pain manifests in physical pain. And the other thing I will say is that it is not a development from The Hard as It Starts. It's a very, very separate story and separate book. But that I feel as though, a lot of the same chords will be struck. Not necessarily in the plot, it's a different plot, but a lot of the themes of women's friendship, women's strength in adversity, and all of those things will be there.
Wonderful. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, I'm looking forward to coming to your launch, The Hard as a Star, which is very soon.
I'm still surprised people want to come.
Oh my goodness, people want to come. You had to move it to a bigger venue.
I know. I said to my agent yesterday, I said, what if 10 people come and I've moved it? How much of an idiot will I look like? Oh, shouldn't have moved it. But I think there's like 152 people booked in.
I know, it's just absolutely incredible. And I'm really looking forward to that.
I feel very lucky. So thank you.
And we are very lucky here at Reading by Candlelight at Molly's Cottage to have you as our May Book Box author. Thank you so much for agreeing to that. And thank you so much for our conversation today. I hope you've enjoyed it, because I have had such a wonderful time. It's been so wonderful to talk to you, Megan. And thank you so much for your time. And everybody, go out, get as a star. But you can't come to Megan's launch because it's sold out.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.